Hello and welcome to another Frontline recap with me, Philip Ingram. Now, I'm going to point you at some videos that sum up what's been going on this week. It's been a quiet week. No, it hasn't. And then point you at some of the interviews that we've had this week. But of course, I present Frontline. I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer, and I commentate across the globe on all matters geopolitics and defence and everything else. But getting straight into it, setting the scene for this week, of course, we have to have Donald Trump. And this is Donald Trump talking about NATO. Have a little look at this here.
NATO's a paper tiger. NATO is us. And when we needed them, we didn't need them, by the way. We didn't need them, obviously, because they haven't helped at all. Just the opposite. They've actually gone out of their way not to help. They didn't even want to give us landing strips. Think of it. And it's not just NATO. You know who else didn't help us? South Korea didn't help us. You know who else didn't help us? Australia didn't help us. You know who else didn't help us? Japan. Germany telling us that, it's not their war. We had nothing to do with it. They wanted me to go and tell them everything I was doing. We didn't know anything about it. Well, if I would have told them, they would have leaked it, and we wouldn't have been nearly as successful, possibly, right? But to the victor belong the spoils. So we haven't heard that in, I think, maybe hundreds of years.
Do you still want them to stay away? Or what role do you expect them to play now?
I'd rather have them stay away.
And then
I'd rather have them stay away because I think they bring with them some problems and some difficulties. And I don't think they bring death, to themselves. But I'd rather have them stay away. We want Greenland. They don't want to give it to us. And I said, bye-bye. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
This is where Trump turns around and says NATO's still a paper tiger. He is sort of right-ish. It's less of a paper tiger because of Donald Trump and his policies than it was beforehand. And it's getting stronger. The European elements of NATO are getting much stronger. This is a positive thing that Donald Trump has forced to happen, which is really good. But then Donald Trump goes on and still says he wants Greenland. This is typical bully boy language in the playground. Greenland is under international agreement with the United States. If Donald Trump tries anything against Greenland outside diplomatic negotiations, he would be committing a felony under US domestic law and therefore would be impeached. He's very good at throwing out bully boy language, and it's up to the rest of the world just to ignore it and move on and just be sensible with what's going on. Talking of being sensible and talking about international geopolitics, in this next clip, this is J.D. Vance talking about his relationship with Viktor Orban. Have a look at this here.
So first of all, I wasn't even aware that Zelensky had said that he was going to send private soldiers to the prime minister's residence until yesterday. Victor actually told me that, and then I went and looked it up. Almost couldn't believe it's true, but it's true. It's completely scandalous. You should never have a foreign head of government or a foreign head of state threatening the head of government of an allied nation. It's preposterous. It's unacceptable. I've also been told that the vice president of the United States coming and saying that Viktor Orban is doing a good job and is a helpful statesman to the cause of peace, that's foreign influence. But what's not foreign influence is when the European Union threatens billions of dollars withheld from Hungary because you guys protect your borders. That's apparently not foreign influence. Do you know how much, again, I would never do this, but you know how easy it would be for the United States to threaten Hungary economically in the same way the EU has? We would never do that because we respect our friends enough to respect their democratic will. What's going on in the EU, what's going on in Brussels, what's going on with some of these foreign influence operations, I'm telling you, it is a scandal. It's the reason why I'm here. We've been disappointed by a lot of the political leadership in Europe because they don't seem particularly interested in solving this particular conflict. And what the president has said is it's the hardest war to solve. In some ways, we thought it would be the easiest, but it has been the hardest. We've been at it for now 14 months, and we're just going to keep on working at it because fundamentally, the war has stopped making sense. What I would say to both the Russians and the Ukrainians is, we're talking about haggling at this point over a few square kilometers of territory in one direction or another. Is that worth losing hundreds of thousands of additional Russian and Ukrainian young men? Is that worth an additional months or even years of higher energy prices and economic devastation? We think the answer is clearly no, but it takes, two to tango. So while Victor and President Trump are going to continue to work towards a peaceful settlement, fundamentally, we can only open the door. The Russians and the Ukrainians have to walk through it.
And in this clip, this is J.D. Vance attacking President Zelensky for criticising Orban. Well, Orban has been the big bloc in the EU to the 90 billion euro loan going to Ukraine, and therefore President Zelensky's got every right to criticise him for that when the rest of the European Union want that loan to go to Ukraine. And he's not getting any money from the United States. So J.D. Vance, why J.D. Vance is backing Viktor Orban, and Orban is an open supporter of Putin, I don't know. And this is very worrying when you've got the President of the United States with almost a Putin apologist, and the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, almost a Putin apologist. There's something not quite right here, and it doesn't feel right. But we'll be watching this closely. And of course, the elections are this weekend, so we shall see whether Viktor Orban remains in power. So I've got 3 interviews I want to point you out this week. But don't just look at the clips that I'm putting here. Go and watch the whole interview, please, because you'll get a much better handle on what's going on from our fantastic guests. And don't just watch these 3, watch all of them, because we've had some fantastic guests on this week. First one I'll point you to is an old friend of the show, John Foreman, former defence attaché into Ukraine and into Moscow. And he's talking about Ukraine getting the Gulf done. So this is bringing the 2 wars together and getting his deals in the Gulf, and the US not getting the deals in the Gulf. Have a look at the clip from our interview here.
I think the deduction has been for a while now that Ukraine has to rely on itself. It can't rely on the Americans. Donald Trump cut all financial support to Ukraine. He's now threatening to cut ammunition support, arms support, as a quid pro quo for some support for Europe, for Iran. Shows the cynicism and amorality of his position, his willingness to place relations with Russia above those of Ukraine. And I think Ukrainians know that now quite well. And that's why you're seeing that 65% of production is now domestic, and they're providing themselves long-term contracts with the Europeans and weaning themselves off, shall we say, the American market.
And yet, since the US-Israeli war on Iran, President Zelensky has been busy showcasing and sharing Ukraine's expertise in defending against Iran. He's been in talks with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE towards defense technology deals, and he's offered to help open the Strait of Hormuz. How clever is that move? And actually, can Ukraine help open the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, I think, notwithstanding the fact that Trump, as we discussed about Trump in Ukraine, I think never waste a good crisis. I think that Zelensky has proven to be particularly adept at using the opportunity presented to him to show what Ukraine can bring to the party at the expense of the Americans. The mighty American military can't provide those sort of defences to Gulf allies, and the Ukrainians have stepped in. So, I think it's not just about selling out drones to these people. It's the quid pro quo to say to Qatar, for example, or Saudi Arabia, hey, this is what we can do for you. What can you do for us? Especially those states in the Middle East who have been more reluctant to lean into assisting Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Well, it's an opportunity for Ukraine. And I think this came out of this workshop I was at. Ukraine has lots to offer its international partners. Direct experience of working with fighting the Russians, an innovation loop which is unbelievably quick. Somebody said to me that the further you move away from the front line, you're weeks or days or weeks, months away from what the innovation is actually like. So capturing that, I think Ukraine can use opportunities with partners to scale up its production, both for its own defences and also to sell to others. On the drones, on the Straits of Hormuz itself, I think Ukraine probably more limited. The problem we have is not sinking Iranian ships using drones. It's opening straits from mines and defending ourselves against drones. So I think there's opportunity for counter UAV, counter drone systems, not just on the land, but also at sea. And I think the Royal Navy's just expressed interest to acquiring anti-drone systems for its ships. So I think that's where they could help. Also, electronic warfare. I think the Ukrainians are very good at using electronic warfare to block Russian drones. So how can we use that experience to defend against Iranian drones launched against targets in the Gulf?
And how, just out of the what you were saying about the strengthening of relationships with with Gulf states, which might previously not have been so interested in relations with Ukraine, how far do you think that goes in securing Ukraine's future, developing those new alliances?
Well, it's fundamental, isn't it? I think the problem with Ukraine, obviously in the last 4 years, it was heavily dependent, and it still is heavily dependent on foreign assistance. It strikes me you want to put more strings to your bow, not just with Europe, especially if the Americans are waning, but places like countries of the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, maybe into Africa. And I know that's the case because they're sending very good people to be ambassadors in these countries to try and widen the support. I think that's also a hedge against, if there's a problem in Europe, then they're not left hanging for a while whilst Europe or the Americans sort themselves out. There's other money and support available. So I think it comes back to the deduction that the war is not going to end anytime soon, and they have to set themselves for the long term and not go from feast to famine, or away from this sort of what we saw before, this donor mentality, to being strong partnerships. I can do this for you. What can you do for me?
And this is where John is talking about the masterstroke that President Zelensky has played by getting into the Gulf and getting ahead of the Americans by selling Ukrainian anti-drone technology, but also Ukrainian expertise into the Gulf countries so they can protect themselves against the Iranian Shahed 136 drone attacks that are coming in, and not waste $4 million Patriot missiles and trying to blow a $30,000 drone out of the sky. And the US is clearly upset by this because they have tried to go behind Zelensky's back and try and get some of the Middle Eastern countries not to do deals with Ukraine. And I think this is one of the reasons why Donald Trump has remained pissed off, I think is the phrase, with Ukraine, because Ukraine has actually beat him to the deal. President Zelensky has pulled out a full house hand of cards and played it on the table after Donald Trump just over a year ago said he didn't have any cards to play. It's clear he does. Next clip I want to point you to is an interview with Kurt Volker, an old friend of the show, on why the war in Iran won't save Putin. Have a look at this here.
What the war in Iran has done is give Putin more money and more time. So he is facing economic difficulties. He's facing military difficulties. Let's just run through them. He can't advance on the ground.
Yep.
Allegedly, they're in the midst of an offensive operation right now, which means they're losing more people than normal.
Yep.
That's the only difference from non-offensive. They have high inflation. They have high interest rates. They have shortages in the economy. They can't produce the number of troops to replace the number that they're losing. They can't produce all of the equipment that they're losing. They are digging down deep into foreign exchange reserves. They are in a difficult spot that they need to try to figure a way out of at some point. Now, what we've done with this war in Iran by sending oil prices through the roof is give him an economic windfall, at least 5 billion euros a month going into the Kremlin's coffers that wasn't going there before. This will buy him probably as much as a year before he has to face those tough choices that he was going to be facing much sooner.
Meanwhile, though, that is if he can get the oil onto ships. He can get the ships out to where it's going to be processed. He can process it himself. And Ukraine is focusing on attacking the oil infrastructure across the board. And we've seen attacks on some of Russia's largest oil exporting
facilities on the Baltic Sea.
On the Baltic, 40% of Russian oil goes out there. They've been hit for 4 or 5 days in a row. And that must be having an economic impact.
I think it does. So I haven't seen any numbers to account for this. They will try to export the other direction to Asia, which is where there's a gap anyway. It's as you pointed out, China was buying Iranian oil. They're going to need to replace that with something. I understand that there are fewer logistical options available to Russia to get the oil to Asia, other than through the Baltic Sea. But I haven't seen numbers that indicate how permanent this is, how much it is taking off the market, and what kind of economic impact it has. But remember, oil was trading before this war was launched between $50 and $60 a barrel. We're now talking oil going up to $200. So the windfall for Russia in getting any oil out is substantial.
Yes. The other thing that Ukraine is having some success at attacking, it seems to be, is the wider Russian defense industrial base. And they've hit some of their factories that and a number of factories that are processing nitrates into explosives and propellants and everything else. And one of the other restrictions that there seems to be with the war in Iran is getting nitrates out through the Red Sea and the Straits of Hormuz for people to use for fertilizers. But if they're used for fertilizers, they're also the key components for explosives and elsewhere. Do you think Ukraine's got the right tactic at attacking Russia's economic ability to fund the war, at its ability to manufacture its armaments and its explosives and all the rest of it, and that will then set the conditions for it to deal with what's going on the front line?
Right. Well, I do think that is the right tactic for a number of different reasons. Russia will still be able to maintain fighting on the front line for a long time. Let's not be overly optimistic here. They will continue to do that. However, the more that they see that Ukraine has the ability to strike deep, the other side of the Ural Mountains, to strike strategic things like the oil export capacity or nitrates, as you point out, and any kind of rocket fuel or aviation fuel. Those are things that will matter to the Russians, and it's going to get people to start thinking, should we take a pause here? Should we have a ceasefire of some kind? And so I think those are the right tactics. I wish that all of us, Europe and the United States, were helping with those long-range attacks. It would speed things up. But as it is, we're sitting back. We're not allowing our weapons to be used for these things. So the Ukrainians have had to develop their own, which they have done and are using successfully for these long-range attacks.
But do you think now that Ukraine's been forced to do that, it's got into a position where this reliance on the United States support has actually got to a point where it doesn't really matter that much anymore? And taking that to the next level, actually Europe's reliance and NATO's reliance on United States weapons and backing, as the more there are threats, the more European nations are going to step up, and all of a sudden they're going to have more independence from the United States. And this is, in the long term, going to hit the US defense industry hard.
Exactly. That's exactly. Take a look again at what just happened in the Gulf. We are defending against low-cost drones with very expensive missiles. More Patriots were fired in these 4 weeks of war than Ukraine has fired in 4 years of war. So it is an uneconomical way to try to defend, and ultimately the cheaper solution will win. So cheaper drones against expensive air defenses, the drones will win. You need the low-cost thing. And you're absolutely right. Ukraine is probably now responsible for 60 to 70% of its own defense needs. And those needs are different than they were 4 years ago. 4 years ago, you needed HIMARS, you needed artillery, you needed cluster munitions, you needed aircraft. Now, they've re-engineered the war so that it is low-cost drones that are very hard to track, very hard to take down, operate at long distance, and then they're continuously being re-innovated in order to evade Russia's detection of these things and countermeasures against those. The U.S. defense industry is not in this game right now, and so there's a lot of skepticism, as we saw in the Gulf, but now also in Ukraine, in Europe, that the U.S. actually has what we need.
And Kurt, as I said, talking about why the war in Iran won't save Putin, it goes on to say how it'll buy him time. It's taking the pressure off Vladimir Putin. Putin is sitting there happy that he's not in the headlines. And interestingly, we have a discussion about why Putin is remaining